The wind came crawling out of the north that afternoon, dry and bitter as a blade. It swept across the empty stretch of prairie, stirring the brittle grass and lifting trails of snow from the drifts that clung to fence posts. The land looked hollow under the pewter sky, a place where even sound seemed to die before it reached another ear. Eli McGraw had lived alone out here for 3 winters, and he had learned to move through silence the way a fish moves through water. He spoke little, worked steady, and let the wind keep him company. The ache of solitude had grown familiar, like the scar on his forearm from a branding iron, always there, but no longer raw. By mid-afternoon, he was in the corral tightening a gate hinge when he heard it, the distant rattle of wheels on frozen earth. He straightened, squinting toward the far ridge where a trail cut across Mason Hale's land. A stagecoach, painted dull red beneath the grime, lurched to a halt near the Hale cabin. He could just make out a figure stepping down, small and slender, clutching a carpet bag. Then the coach moved on, leaving only the white swirl of its passing. Eli watched for a while, but no one came out to meet the traveler. Mason was gone again, likely south, chasing cards or whiskey. The woman stood there a long time in the cold, the wind tugging at her shawl. Finally, she turned toward Hale's cabin and vanished from sight. He went back to his work, though his hands felt slower. The air thickened with snow, the flakes lazy and large. By dusk, the sky had sunk to the color of pewter and the world to silence. He had just finished stacking kindling when he noticed a dark shape moving through the storm. At first, he thought it a stray cow. Then, as it drew closer, he saw it was a woman, head bowed, skirts heavy with ice, steps unsteady in the deep snow. She stopped a few yards from the porch, her breath coming out in quick white bursts. "Mr. McGraw?" Her voice was roughened by cold, barely more than a whisper. He nodded wary. "You're far from town, ma'am." She hesitated, clutching her carpet bag to her chest. "Mason Hale sent for me. I arrived this afternoon." He wasn't there. The words came thin and breaking, as if the wind might carry them off. Eli's jaw tightened. Mason Hale was a reckless fool, but this was cruelty of a meaner kind. He stepped aside and opened the door. "You'd best come in before the night takes you." For a moment, she didn't move, as though pride held her there on the threshold. Then, trembling, she stepped past him into the dim warmth. Inside, the cabin was small, one room divided by a curtain, a stone hearth, a table scarred from years of use. The firelight flickered against the log walls, warming the air with the scent of wood smoke and coffee grounds. She stood there, dripping snow onto the floorboards, eyes darting to the empty chair by the fire. "Sit," Eli said quietly. "I'll get you a blanket." She obeyed, lowering herself slowly, her gloved hands still clenched around the carpet bag. He found an old wool blanket, his late wife's, the edges frayed but soft, and laid it over her shoulders. She didn't thank him, only pulled it close, staring at the fire as though trying to remember what heat felt like. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara Wren," she murmured. "From St. Louis. Eli McGraw." She nodded faintly, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. The silence between them stretched out, broken only by the hiss of burning pine. "You can stay here tonight," he said at last. "Storm's not fit for travel. I don't want charity. It ain't charity." "It's common decency." For a long moment, she didn't reply. Then she whispered, "Thank you." And the sound of it carried a weight no words could ease. He poured her a cup of coffee, black and hot, and handed it to her. She held it with both hands, steam curling up around her face. When her fingers brushed his, he noticed how cold they were. Bone cold, the kind that seeps inward and lingers. "You came all this way for him?" he asked quietly, her shoulders stiffened. "I answered his advertisement. Promised a wedding, a home. He wrote fine letters. I thought—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Doesn't matter now," Eli nodded slowly. "Mason's not the settling kind. I see that." The storm deepened outside, the wind whistling through the cracks in the shutters. Eli stoked the fire higher, the flames licking orange and gold across the room. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet was not easy, but it was steady. He studied her from the corner of his eye, the worn hem of her dress, The way her shawl was mended with mismatched thread, the faint tremor in her breath. She looked young, but her eyes carried years that life had carved too soon. When she finally looked up, their gazes met, and he saw something there he recognized. Not weakness, but endurance. The same kind that had kept him breathing after Mary's passing. "You can have the bed," he said softly. "I'll take the chair. I'll sleep by the fire." "I don't need—" "Ma'am," he interrupted gently. "You've walked through a storm in your wedding dress. You'll take the bed." Her lips parted, as if to argue, but then she nodded once and rose. She moved behind the curtain, her steps slow, uncertain. Eli sat by the fire, the heat on his face, the ache of memory stirring in his chest. He could almost hear Mary's voice again, the soft hum she used to sing when the wind blew hard against the windows. He leaned back, listening to the storm's hollow cry beyond the walls. Somewhere in that sound was the echo of every lost thing on this frontier. Love, hope, the promise of something gentle. And yet, within his cabin's small circle of light, there was life again, a fire, a breath, a stranger who had knocked on his door when the world had turned cold. Eli closed his eyes. He didn't know what morning would bring, but for the first time in a long while the night didn't feel so endless. Emotional tone and realization, tone, cold, desolate, compassionate. Realization. Mercy often begins in silence, and the loneliest hearts recognize it without words. Morning came slow and pale through the frost-glazed window, turning the cabin walls to faint gold. The snow had not stopped through the night. It lay deep and unbroken, swallowing fences and paths alike. The prairie beyond was a white emptiness, endless and soundless, as though the whole world had gone still, just to listen to its own heartbeat. Clara Wren rose early, though sleep had barely touched her. The borrowed dress she wore hung loose on her frame, patched from Eli's late wife's trunk. She moved quietly, almost ghost-like, sweeping the hearth before Eli woke. The fire was her first duty. It kept the house alive. When Eli stepped from the small back room, she had already set coffee to boil and bread to warm on the stones by the fire. He paused at the sight, his hat in his hand, unsure what to say. "You don't have to do that," he said at last. "I can't just sit here," she replied, not looking at him. Idle hands don't help the mind. He nodded, though her words carried more weight than she meant them to. Days passed that way, steady, quiet, almost ritual. The snow deepened, cutting them off from town. They rationed supplies, worked the small chores that could be done indoors, mending tack, sharpening tools, feeding the animals when weather allowed. When Clara sewed a rip in one of his shirts, her fingers moved with the neat precision of someone who had long practiced mending what others had broken. Eli spoke little, but he watched her, not in curiosity, but in recognition. There was something about her manner, the way she folded silence around herself, that felt too familiar. She had the same inward gaze he carried after Mary passed, the look of someone trying to live around a wound that never quite closed. One evening, as dusk pressed close against the windows, he found her standing by the small shelf near the fire, her eyes resting on the Bible that lay there. Between its pages, she had discovered a photograph, a faded image of a young woman sitting in a rocking chair, smiling faintly, her hair braided neatly down her shoulder. "Mary," Eli said quietly from behind her. Clara turned, startled. "Your wife?" He nodded once. She passed. 3 years now. Clara hesitated, then set the photograph down with care, as though afraid to disturb the memory within it. "She looks kind," she was. "Never had much, but she made this place feel like home." He stared at the photograph a long moment. Then one winter fever came through. Took her before I could fetch the doctor. After that, the world got smaller. The words came slow, like thawing ice breaking apart. He had not spoken of Mary in full sentences for years. Yet Clara's stillness, the way she simply listened without pity, loosened the tightness in his chest. "I'm sorry," she murmured. He gave a quiet, resigned smile. "So am I." They sat by the fire that night without speaking. Outside, the snow hissed softly against the roof, the only sound in the world. Clara stitched by lamplight, her fingers moving in rhythm to the storm. Eli whittled at a piece of wood, the knife steady in his hand. Two strangers working side by side, not in friendship yet, but in the comfort of company that asked for nothing. Later, as the wind picked up, Clara spoke suddenly, as if the words had been burning in her throat. "The man who sent for me, Mason Hale, he wasn't the first." Eli looked up but said nothing. "I answered another letter once," she went on, her voice quiet, distant. "Back in Missouri. A man promised marriage, safety, but he had a temper. When I tried to leave, he said no one would take me. Not a woman with no family, no dowry. He was right for a time," she swallowed hard. "So when Mason's letter came, I thought maybe the West would be kinder. It wasn't." The fire popped, scattering sparks. Eli leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Some men use words like snares. They promise comfort, but all they mean to own is obedience." She gave a faint, bitter smile. "You've seen it then. Seen it, yes. Fought it too." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not affection, but understanding. The kind that runs deeper than sympathy. After a while, Clara rose and hung the kettle back over the flames. "You've kept this place well," she said. "Even alone. Mary left it that way," he replied. "All I did was keep it from falling apart." She turned then, her gaze softening. "That's more than most men would do." The room felt warmer for a moment, though the fire had not changed. When she retired behind the curtain that night, Eli stayed by the hearth, staring at the old tools hanging by the door. Each had its purpose, each bore marks of use, much like the people who wielded them. The lantern light glinted on the iron, and he thought about the way time wears on everything it touches, yet somehow makes it shine smoother with enough years of care. He realized then that Clara had brought life back into the house in quiet ways. The smell of fresh bread, the faint hum when she worked, the folded linens on the chair. Small things, but they filled the empty corners that had gathered dust since Mary's passing. Outside, the snow fell steady, soft as forgiveness. The days blurred into one another. Gray mornings, quiet evenings, chores shared without words. When Eli returned one afternoon from breaking ice for the horses, he found Clara humming faintly by the stove, sleeves rolled, hair loose from its braid. For a moment he thought he saw Mary again. Not her face, but her grace, her steadiness. The thought startled him, and he stepped outside into the cold, letting the wind clear his head. By nightfall the storm began again, whispering against the eaves. Clara sat near the fire, darning one of his gloves. "The snow doesn't scare you?" she asked. "Not anymore," he said. "It used to. When Mary was sick, every storm felt like a wall closing in. But now, it's just weather. Comes, goes, same as sorrow." She looked at him then, eyes wide in the firelight. "You talk like you've made peace with it." "Maybe not peace," he said, "but I've learned to sit still inside it." The fire cracked softly. The smell of pine and smoke drifted through the room. Clara smiled faintly, then bent back over her stitching. That night, long after she'd gone to bed, Eli sat awake, listening to the wind. He realized that the silence between them no longer felt empty. It was the kind that held warmth, the kind two people could share without needing to speak. Emotional tone and realization. Tone, introspective, mournful, gently hopeful. Realization, grief is a long winter, but kindness can be the first sign of spring. The wind shifted that evening, low and restless, carrying the scent of rain and iron. By nightfall, thunder rolled across the plains like distant artillery, rumbling through the ribs of the earth. The first drops came slow, fat, and cold, striking the roof like pebbles before turning into a steady downpour. Eli stepped out to secure the horses, his coat pulled tight against the gusts. The sky flickered white, showing the horizon for a heartbeat, then swallowed it again in darkness. He'd seen storms like this before, brief but fierce, the kind that stripped branches and turned trails to rivers. Inside the cabin, Clara gathered the drying laundry from near the hearth and folded it neatly. The fire hissed and spat from the moisture in the logs. Though she had grown used to the quiet company of the place, the storm made her uneasy. It reminded her of nights back east when trains groaned past her boarding house and the wind rattled the shutters, making her feel small and powerless again. A sudden knock startled her. It was firm, hurried, a man's hand against wood. She froze, glancing toward the door where Eli's shadow stood motionless. He drew the latch cautiously, the wind shoving the door open with a spray of rain. A figure stood outside, tall, broad-shouldered, soaked through. His long hair clung to his neck and water streamed from the brim of his hat. "Evening, McGraw," the stranger said, voice deep and roughened by travel. "Didn't mean to startle you." Eli's eyes narrowed, then softened in recognition. "Nolan," the man nodded once, stepping into the light. "Storm caught me halfway from Dry Creek. Figured I'd rather your floor than a lightning bolt." Clara stared, uncertain. His skin was sun-browned, his features cut sharp, high cheekbones, black eyes that seemed to read more than they revealed. Around his neck hung a small leather charm, worn smooth by time. She'd heard stories of Apache riders in dime novels, fierce, silent, merciless. But the man before her seemed only tired. Eli shut the door and bolted it. "You remember Clara?" he asked gently. "She's been staying here a spell." Clara hesitated, then gave a polite nod. "Good evening," Nolan tipped his hat. "Ma'am." His voice held respect, not presumption. He shrugged off his wet coat and hung it by the door. The scent of rain and horse clung to him. Eli motioned toward the fire. "Sit, warm up. Coffee's fresh. Don't mind if I do." When Clara handed him the cup, he accepted it carefully, his rough hand startlingly gentle. "My thanks," he said. "You brew it strong, the way the desert men like it." She blinked, uncertain how to reply, and turned back to her sewing. Eli settled opposite him. "What brings you through?" Nolan's expression darkened. "Trouble, maybe. Couple of rustlers seen near the canyon. Heard they've been picking off ranches, easy ones, where men are gone or drinking. Figured I'd warn you before they get bold." Eli's hand went to his jaw. "You think they'll come this far?" "Can't say. But I'd keep your rifle close tonight." The storm beat harder against the windows. Clara's stitching faltered. "You think we're in danger?" Nolan looked at her evenly. "Out here, ma'am, everyone's in danger. It's just a matter of when it comes riding by." Eli rose to check the shutters. "Then we'll be ready." They spent the next hour reinforcing the cabin, shuttering the windows, bringing the rifle near the door, setting a lantern low to keep the light from spilling outside. Nolan worked beside Eli without a word, steady and capable. When he noticed one hinge hanging loose, he fetched Eli's hammer and fixed it himself. "Storm like this'll keep most men huddled under whatever roof they can find," he said, tightening the last nail. "But rustlers, they use the noise for cover." Lightning cracked close, rattling the walls. Clara flinched. "White Dove," Nolan said softly, using the name without hesitation. "The storm's loud, but it won't hurt you. The sky just speaks its anger and moves on." She looked at him, startled. "White Dove?" He smiled faintly. "Means you carry peace even when you're afraid." "That's rare." Clara said nothing, though the words settled deep in her chest. Hours passed. The three of them sat by the dying fire, listening. Outside, the rain struck the earth in long silver lines. Between the thunderclaps came another sound, faint but unmistakable, the drumming of hooves. Eli was on his feet at once. "Hear that?" Nolan nodded. 2, maybe 3 riders. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. Lightning flashed again, revealing 2 silhouettes cresting the ridge. Men on horseback, their shapes blurred by rain. Then darkness swallowed them. "They're scouting," Nolan murmured. "Won't come close tonight. Just marking where the cattle and fences lie." Eli loaded his rifle anyway. "I'll take the watch. I'll sit with you," Nolan said. The hours crawled by. The men stayed by the door, listening to the storm's rhythm. Clara stayed awake too, pretending to sew but really just watching the 2 of them, the cowboy and the half-Apache, both cut from the same quiet cloth. She saw no difference in their decency, no division of blood or border. Only men who understood hardship and met it with stillness. When the wind finally eased, dawn began to creep pale and colorless across the horizon. The world outside steamed with fog and wet earth. Nolan stood, stretching. "They're gone," he said. "For now," Eli nodded, fatigue in his eyes. "You'll ride out?" "I'll circle east, keep watch along the ridge." They'll think twice before they try a place that's guarded. Eli extended a hand. Obliged, Nalin. The man gripped it firmly. Keep that fire burning, friend. Clara came to the door as he stepped into the morning gray. Thank you, she said softly. He turned back, the faintest smile on his face. You don't owe thanks, just faith. Then he mounted his horse and rode off into the mist, vanishing into the folds of rain-soaked hills. For a long while, Clara stood watching the horizon. The prairie glistened, every blade of grass jeweled with water. The air smelled clean, sharp, like something renewed. Behind her, Eli spoke quietly. He's a good man. Some folks don't see it because they don't look close enough. Clara nodded. I think I understand him better than I thought I could. Eli smiled faintly. You understand more than most. The fire crackled again, small but steady. Outside, the world seemed wider now, not empty, but waiting. Emotional tone and realization. Tone, suspenseful, atmospheric, redemptive. Realization. Danger has a way of revealing a man's soul, and trust grows easiest in the dark. The snow melted in fits and starts, slow as forgiveness. Days lengthened, and the ranch came alive again, the corral dripping, the roof shedding ice in steady rhythms, the earth soft beneath every step. What had been a world of white silence now murmured with water and wind. Yet inside the cabin, the thaw brought no warmth. Clara kept busy from dawn until the light died, sweeping, tending the stove, mending torn shirts with quick, neat stitches. She moved with quiet purpose, but the air between her and Eli had grown tense, taut like a rope stretched too thin. Every word seemed to echo. Every silence weighed too much. One morning she spoke without turning from the wash basin. When the road clears, she said, her voice steady but low, I'll be leaving. Eli looked up from the saddle he was oiling. Leaving? I can't stay here forever, she continued, wringing out a cloth. You've done more than enough. I won't live on charity, he set the brush down slowly. Ain't charity, he said. It's just company. That makes it worse. She turned toward him then, pale, resolute. You've been kind, Mr. McGraw, but I can't take what isn't mine. Eli said nothing for a long while. He'd grown used to her presence, the soft clatter of dishes, the hum of her voice when she thought no one was listening. Now the thought of that silence returning filled him with something close to fear. But he only nodded, jaw tight. Do what you feel's right. That night, he heard her crying softly through the wall, muffled sobs that rose and broke like wind through dry grass. He stared at the ceiling, his chest aching, hands clenched at his sides. There were no words for the kind of loneliness that comes from caring too much, too quietly. In the days that followed, they moved around each other like ghosts, careful, polite, half vanished. He would set the tools by the door. She would place his coffee where he always liked it. Neither looked too long nor spoke too much. Then, one gray afternoon, the quiet shattered. Eli was mending a fence rail when the dogs began barking, wild, insistent. He looked up to see a rider coming fast from the south trail, a man hunched in the saddle, hat askew. Mud splashed beneath the hooves. Eli's stomach dropped even before the man drew close enough to see his face. Mason Hale. He hadn't changed much since the last time Eli saw him in town, still mean-eyed and red from drink, his mouth twisted into a permanent sneer. But there was something uglier now, something unhinged. Well, I'll be damned, Mason slurred, sliding off his horse. Didn't figure to find my runaway bride playing house with a widower. Clara froze on the porch, the broom slipping from her hands. Her face drained of color. Mason, she whispered. He spat into the mud. You thought you could just up and vanish, didn't you? After I paid the preacher and sent for you? Eli stepped between them. That's enough. Mason laughed, a short, bitter sound. Oh, I see how it is. McGraw, the noble rancher, saving stray women like they're lost calves. Tell me, you keep her for chores or for warmth? Eli's eyes hardened. You best get back on your horse. Mason took a step closer, his hand twitching toward the revolver at his belt. She's mine by law. You got no right keeping what ain't yours. Law don't give a man claim to another soul, Eli said evenly. You left her to die out here. That's on you. Rain began to spit from the darkening clouds, cold and sharp. The dogs growled from the porch. Mason's eyes darted between them. Eli steady as stone, Clara trembling but unbroken. "Step aside," Mason hissed. Eli didn't move. "Not while I'm breathing." The rifle in his hand didn't waver. The hammer clicked back, the sound slicing through the air like lightning. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then Mason spat in the dirt. "You'll regret this, McGraw." "Both of you will." He turned, stumbling toward his horse. "Ain't the last you'll see of me." He mounted clumsily and rode off into the gray distance, his curses swallowed by the wind. Eli lowered the rifle slowly, exhaling the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Clara sank to the porch steps, her hands trembling so violently she could barely steady them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for any of this. He promised things, safety, a home. I thought maybe—" Her voice cracked. "I thought I could start over." Eli crouched beside her, his voice rough but kind. "You don't owe me an apology. That man's choices ain't yours." Tears spilled freely now, hot and unguarded. "I keep bringing trouble wherever I go." He shook his head. "Trouble finds good people because the bad ones know they won't fight back." He hesitated, searching for words that didn't sound like pity. "You're safe here, Clara. For as long as you need." She looked up at him, eyes rimmed red, hair fallen loose around her face. "I don't deserve your kindness." "Maybe not," he said softly. "But it's yours all the same." For a long moment, neither moved. The rain thickened, tapping softly against the porch roof. Eli started to stand, meaning to give her space, but her hand caught his. He froze. She didn't look at him, just held his hand in both of hers, trembling but certain. "I know you didn't do it for thanks," she whispered. "But I need to say it anyway. Thank you." Eli swallowed hard, feeling something deep inside him shift. Not like falling, but like the slow settling of a weight he hadn't realized he'd carried for years. He nodded once, voice quiet. "You're welcome, Clara." Then he stepped away, back into the rain, the rifle still warm in his grip. The dogs followed him to the gate, silent now, their hackles down. Behind him, the cabin glowed faintly in the dim light, a refuge that had weathered one more storm. Inside, Clara stood at the window, watching him walk the fence line with his steady limp, her hand pressed to the glass. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen, and somehow free. Emotional tone and realization. Tone, raw, restrained, fiercely moral. Realization, protection born of respect, is the truest kind of love, even when it remains unspoken. The night it happened was windless, the kind of still, brittle dark that made the world feel hollow and waiting. The moon hung pale behind thin clouds, casting long silver shadows over the corral. Eli had gone out late to check the stock, the limp in his leg stiffening with the cold. Inside, Clara was dousing the lamps, humming a faint tune she didn't know the words to. Then came the smell. Faint at first, then sharp and wrong. Smoke. Eli turned just in time to see the orange bloom of fire rising behind the barn. It spread fast, licking along the dry hay and timber, the night shattering with the panicked bawling of cattle. "Clara!" he shouted, running for the house. "Get the rifle!" She was already on the porch, eyes wide, skirts whipping in the sudden heat. The flames painted her face gold and red. "Who?" Before he could answer, a voice rose from the dark beyond the corral. "Come out, McGraw. Time to settle debts." Mason Hale. The crack of a pistol split the air, and a bullet tore splinters from the porch post beside her. Clara flinched but didn't scream. She ducked inside, grabbed the Winchester from above the mantel, and tossed it to Eli with shaking hands. Two other figures moved in the dark near the burning barn, silhouettes against the inferno, rifles glinting. The men were shouting, driving the herd wild. The air was thick with ash and the raw stench of burning wood. Eli took cover beside the water trough, firing into the dark. One of the men cried out and fell. Clara dropped to her knees beside the steps, loading cartridges with fumbling fingers, passing them to him one by one. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but her hands stayed steady. The barn roared like a furnace. Sparks leapt to the sky, raining down on the cabin roof. Eli could feel the heat searing his face. "Mason!" he shouted over the fire. "You don't want this!" From the shadows came a drunken laugh. "You took what's mine, McGraw. Ain't no man steals from me and lives to brag." Eli's jaw clenched. "You left her to die. That's all anyone needs to know." A flash, the muzzle fire from behind the wagon. Eli turned and fired back, the rifle kicking against his shoulder. The shot hit true. The man dropped. Then another blast, closer. Pain exploded in Eli's thigh, and he went down hard, the rifle clattering away. He tried to rise, but his leg gave out beneath him. "Eli!" Clara screamed. She ran to him, dragging him toward the porch as the last gunman fled into the dark. Mason staggered forward, face twisted in fury, revolver raised. "You should have stayed out of this, woman," he snarled. Clara's eyes went wide, then narrowed. She snatched the fallen rifle, leveled it, and fired. The recoil knocked her back, the sound echoing across the burning yard. Mason stumbled, disbelief frozen on his face. He fell backward into the dirt near the corral, the gun slipping from his hand. The night went very still. The barn collapsed in on itself, a final groan of timbers and flame. The cattle scattered into the darkness. Smoke curled skyward, turning the stars to ghosts. Clara dropped to her knees beside Eli, sobbing, not from fear, but from relief. "You're hit," she whispered, tearing fabric from her skirt to bind the wound. Her hands were black with soot, her face streaked with ash and tears. Eli winced but managed a faint smile. "You shoot better than most men I know." She let out a choked laugh. "Don't talk." He tried to answer, but the pain rolled over him like thunder. The world dimmed at the edges. He felt her hands on his chest, her breath quick and desperate, calling his name as though it might keep him tethered. When he woke again, dawn was breaking, a thin, cold light spilling through the smoke-hazed air. The fire had burned itself out, leaving only blackened ruins where the barn once stood. The smell of wet ash and scorched leather hung heavy. Clara sat by the hearth, still in her soot-streaked dress, hair undone, hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes were closed, lips moving in a whisper of prayer. Words half-remembered from another life, one that felt long ago. Eli tried to speak, but his throat was dry. She stirred, looked over, and hurried to his side. "You're awake," she breathed, relief washing through her face. He nodded weakly. "Barn?" "Gone," she said softly. "But the cattle scattered. Some will come back. The rest, we'll manage." He studied her. The exhaustion carved into her features, the streak of blood across her arm, the steadiness in her gaze despite it all. "You saved my life," he murmured. Clara looked away. "You saved mine first." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackle of the small fire she'd kept alive through the night. She poured him a cup of water, her hand trembling only slightly. "Eli," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've been running from every place I ever called home. But this feels different, even with all that's lost." He reached for her hand, slow and deliberate. "Maybe it's because you stopped running," he said. She met his eyes, gray meeting blue, both rimmed in smoke and tears. No words passed between them, yet something settled in that look, solid as stone. Outside, the prairie stretched quiet and endless, the sky pale with morning. The fire had taken much, the barn, the feed, Mason Hale's last cruelty, but it had also burned away everything false, leaving only what was real, two souls bound by survival, and something deeper, neither dared to name. Clara brushed the ash from his sleeve, her touch light, reverent. "Rest now," she said. "You're safe." He nodded, eyes closing, her hand still in his. And as he drifted into sleep, he felt, for the first time in years, not alone. Emotional tone and realization. Tone, tragic yet intimate, purifying through fire. Realization. Love, like courage, is proven when everything else burns away. The weeks that followed passed in a quiet sort of grace, the kind that comes after ruin, when the world has burned down to its truest shape. The snow melted for good, leaving behind black earth rich with ash. The wind softened. Calves bawled in the distance, wildflowers beginning to edge through the charred soil near the corral. The barn stood as a skeleton now, beams scorched and split. Yet even that ruin seemed to hold a strange dignity, a monument to what they had survived. Eli healed slowly. The wound in his leg itched as it knit, the limp stubborn but easing a little each day. He refused the crutch Clara offered, saying a man ought to learn to lean on his own 2 feet again. Still, she walked beside him whenever he went out, silent, steady, her hand hovering near his arm should he stumble. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings brought the sound of coffee boiling and the scrape of Clara's hoe in the small patch of garden she was reclaiming near the porch. Evenings came with the hum of her voice, soft and tuneless, as she mended or read by firelight. They didn't speak much of the fire or of Mason Hale. His grave lay near the fence line, marked by a single uncut stone. Eli had dug it himself. Slow, grim work done without bitterness. No man ought to lie unburied, he'd said. And Clara, though she said nothing, placed a wildflower at the head of the mound before turning back toward the cabin. The lawmen came a fortnight later, 3 riders from town, their dust rising in the morning sun. They dismounted by the gate, their faces cautious but not unkind. The eldest, a marshal with gray whiskers, doffed his hat. "McGraw," he greeted. "Heard there was trouble out this way. Fire, gunplay, a man found dead." Eli stood straight, his limp pronounced in the damp grass. "That's true. You'll tell it plain?" Eli nodded once, plain as it happened. He told them everything, the threats, the fire, the fight that left Mason dead in the dirt. He spoke without anger or pride, only truth. Clara stood on the porch, hands clasped before her, her shawl drawn close. When Eli finished, the marshal looked to the others. No one spoke for a long time. Then the man sighed, glancing toward the blackened barn. "Sounds like justice found its way here before we did," he said at last. "No charges, no quarrel. The prairie's got a way of sorting its own reckonings." He touched the brim of his hat to Clara. "Ma'am." They rode off into the sun, leaving peace in their wake, the kind born not of innocence, but of understanding. That night, as dusk gathered over the plains, Clara brought out 2 cups of coffee and joined Eli on the porch. The frogs had started their singing again down near the creek, and the air smelled of damp earth and lilac. "You didn't have to tell them everything," she said quietly. "Didn't have to," he agreed, sipping slow. "But truth don't rot like a lie does. Better to leave the air clean," she smiled faintly. "You always talk like that?" "Only when I mean it." They sat a long time in companionable quiet, the kind that spoke more than words ever could. Spring rolled on. The grass thickened, green and forgiving. Eli repaired the corral boards one by one, his limp a little less each day. Clara planted beans and onions, then sunflowers along the fence where the ash had settled. Their gold faces turned toward the light, small, stubborn miracles of color against the blackened ground. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, Clara would pause in her work and watch Eli, his steady movements, the careful patience in everything he did. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he'd watch her too. Her sleeves rolled, hair tied back, the curve of her smile when she hummed to herself. It was a quiet courtship, one of glances and gestures, unspoken yet sure. Then, one morning in late May, the post rider stopped at the gate. He handed Clara an envelope, her name written in careful script, Mrs. Clara McGraw. Her heart skipped. "This isn't mine," she said automatically. "It must be," but when she turned, Eli was standing in the doorway, hat in hand, a rare softness in his eyes. "It's yours," he said simply. "Parson came through town last week. I asked him to set it right." Clara stared down at the letter, her fingers trembling. "You didn't even ask me." "No need," Eli said, stepping closer. "You already answered. You stayed." Her eyes filled and she pressed the letter to her chest, as if to hold back the tide of feeling rising within her. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she smiled, small, tearful, but steady. "You always were a quiet man," she whispered. "Talking never built much worth keeping," he said, his voice rough with tenderness. "But work and love? They do." She reached for his hand and he took it without hesitation. Later that week, they hitched the wagon and rode into town for supplies. The sky was a clean, endless blue, the road lined with new grass. Clara wore her shawl loosely, her hair braided against the wind. Eli drove with his usual calm, one hand steady on the reins, the other resting near hers. Halfway down the hill, Clara turned to look back. The cabin stood small but strong against the horizon, smoke curling gently from the chimney, the fence newly mended, the field dark with promise. A single sunflower nodded in the breeze, bright against the earth. She felt something quiet and sure settle in her chest. The past had not been erased, only redeemed. "Home looks different when you build it yourself," she said softly. Eli glanced her way, his eyes warm beneath the brim of his hat. "Ain't the place," he said. "It's the people standing in it." The wagon rolled on, wheels creaking in rhythm with the wind. And as the land stretched out before them, vast and green and waiting, Clara realized that love hadn't come to rescue her. It had come to teach her how to stay. Emotional tone and realization. Tone. Peaceful, redemptive, deeply human. Realization. After all the storms, love is the simple act of rebuilding, together.